Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of a Man. Lorenzo Fitzpatrick had always been underestimated, and he preferred it that way. At 34, he possessed the kind of quiet intelligence that most people missed, the type that observed, calculated, and struck when least expected. His lean frame and unassuming demeanor masked years of military training and a mind sharp enough to have built 3 successful tech companies from nothing. Growing up in foster care after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12, Lorenzo had learned early that the world respected only strength and results. He'd clawed his way through community college on scholarships, served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a communication specialist, then used his GI benefits to study computer science at MIT. By 28, he'd sold his first cybersecurity firm for 8 figures. By 32, his second venture in blockchain technology had made him genuinely wealthy. But money hadn't been enough to erase the sting of being an outsider. When he'd met Nicole Potter at a charity gala 2 years ago, her genuine laugh and apparent disinterest in his wealth had charmed him. She was beautiful, auburn hair, green eyes, and a smile that could light up a room. More importantly, she seemed to see him as a person, not just a bank account. What Lorenzo hadn't realized was that Nicole's father, Gilbert Raymond, had orchestrated the entire meeting. Gilbert Raymond was old money, the kind that traced its lineage back to railroad barons and steel magnates. The Raymond family had controlled significant portions of Chicago's real estate market for 4 generations. But while the name carried weight, the actual fortune had been hemorrhaging for decades due to poor investments and Gilbert's gambling addiction. Gilbert had done his research on Lorenzo. He knew about the military service, the business success, and most importantly, the bank accounts. What he'd seen was a perfect mark, a lonely, wealthy man desperate for acceptance who could be manipulated through his daughter. The courtship had been a masterpiece of deception. Nicole played her part perfectly, feigning interest in Lorenzo's stories, laughing at his jokes, and gradually allowing him to believe he was winning her over through his own merit. Gilbert remained in the background, the stern but ultimately approving father who was warming up to his daughter's choice. The wedding 18 months ago had been everything Lorenzo had dreamed of, elegant, intimate, and filled with people who seemed genuinely happy for them. He'd spent nearly $200,000 on the event, wanting to give Nicole the fairy tale wedding she deserved. But fairy tales, Lorenzo was about to learn, often had monsters hiding behind beautiful facades. The first red flag had been subtle. 3 months after the wedding, Nicole had started spending more time with her father, taking long lunches and weekend trips that she claimed were about family business. When Lorenzo offered to help or get involved, she'd smile and say he was too busy with his own work to be bothered with Raymond family affairs. Then came the financial requests. Small at first, a few thousand here and there for emergencies or investments. Gilbert needed a temporary loan to cover some unexpected expenses. The family lawyer required a retainer for some complex estate planning, always with the promise of immediate repayment, always with Nicole as the messenger, always with just enough urgency to discourage too many questions. Lorenzo's military training had taught him to read people and situations, but love, or what he believed was love, had clouded his judgment. He'd wanted so desperately to belong, to be accepted by Nicole's world, that he'd ignored the growing pile of evidence that he was being systematically fleeced. The second red flag was Nicole's behavior in private. The warmth and affection that had drawn him to her began to fade shortly after the wedding. She became distant, distracted, and when he tried to discuss it, she'd deflect with complaints about stress or work. Their intimate life became perfunctory, scheduled around her increasingly frequent absences. But it was the discovery of the burner phone that finally opened Lorenzo's eyes. 6 months ago, while looking for Nicole's regular phone to answer an important call she'd missed, Lorenzo had found a second device hidden in her jewelry box. The text messages told a story that shattered his world. Nicole laughing with her friends about her desperate husband, Gilbert bragging about how easy it was to manipulate the foster kid with daddy issues, and worst of all, planning their eventual divorce once they'd extracted enough money to solve the family's financial problems. Most men might have confronted them immediately, demanded explanations, or filed for divorce in a rage. But Lorenzo wasn't most men. The same calculating mind that had built his fortune now turned toward a different kind of problem solving. If Gilbert Raymond wanted to play games with a man who had nothing to lose, Lorenzo would teach him the difference between old money arrogance and new money intelligence. For 6 months, Lorenzo had played the perfect mark. He'd continued to respond to their requests for money, all while carefully documenting every transaction, every lie, every manipulation. He'd hired private investigators to dig into Gilbert's real financial situation, discovering debts to some very dangerous people and a gambling problem that had spiraled completely out of control. More importantly, Lorenzo had used his cybersecurity expertise to gain access to communications and financial records that painted a complete picture of the conspiracy against him. Every email, every text message, every bank transfer had been carefully cataloged and stored in multiple secure locations. The Sunday lunch invitation from Gilbert had come 3 days ago, presented by Nicole as a family bonding opportunity. She'd seemed unusually nervous when delivering it, and Lorenzo had known instinctively that this was meant to be the end game, the final humiliation before they moved to the next phase of their plan. As Lorenzo adjusted his tie and prepared to leave for what Nicole believed would be his destruction, he allowed himself a small smile. Gilbert Raymond was about to learn that underestimating a man who'd survived war zones and corporate boardrooms was a mistake that carried a very steep price. The game was about to begin, and Lorenzo held all the cards. Chapter 2: The Sunday Massacre. The Raymond family estate sat on 2 acres of manicured lawn in Lake Forest, its Georgian architecture screaming old money and established power. As Lorenzo pulled his Tesla into the circular drive, he noted the 3 other luxury cars already parked there: Gilbert's Bentley, Nicole's BMW, and a Mercedes he didn't recognize. Inside, the house was exactly what Lorenzo expected: dark wood paneling, oiled paintings of stern ancestors, and furniture that probably cost more than most people's homes. But Lorenzo's trained eye caught the telltale signs of financial strain: slightly faded patches where artwork had been removed, gaps in the family silver display, and the subtle where that came from deferred maintenance. Gilbert Raymond stood in the center of the formal dining room like a king holding court. At 62, he still cut an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, and possessed of the kind of natural arrogance that came from generations of unearned privilege. His wife Dolores had passed away 5 years earlier, leaving him to manage both the family fortune and Nicole's life with the same heavy-handed approach that had characterized his business dealings. "Lorenzo," Gilbert's voice boomed across the room with false warmth. "So glad you could join us for our little family gathering." Nicole emerged from the kitchen, looking stunning in a blue dress that Lorenzo had bought her for their anniversary. She kissed his cheek with the same mechanical affection she'd been showing him for months, and he caught the brief look of guilt that flashed across her features. The third person in the room was Casey Hale, Gilbert's longtime lawyer and golf partner. Lorenzo had met Casey before, a thin, nervous man who seemed to specialize in helping wealthy families hide their assets and minimize their tax burdens. His presence here was interesting, suggesting this gathering had a purpose beyond simple family bonding. "Casey was just telling us about some exciting investment opportunities," Gilbert continued, pouring himself a generous scotch. "Perhaps you'd be interested in hearing about them, Lorenzo. I know you're always looking for ways to put that tech money to good use." Lorenzo accepted a drink and settled into his chair, noting how everyone else seemed positioned to observe his reactions. "I'm always open to hearing new ideas," he replied mildly. The lunch proceeded with the kind of forced conversation that characterized most of Lorenzo's interactions with Nicole's family. Gilbert dominated the discussion with stories designed to highlight his social connections and business acumen, while Casey nodded along like an eager puppy. Nicole contributed little, seemingly lost in her own thoughts. It was during dessert that Gilbert finally showed his true colors. "You know, Lorenzo," Gilbert began, his tone shifting to something more intimate and conspiratorial. "I've been thinking about your relationship with my daughter." Lorenzo set down his fork and gave Gilbert his full attention. "Oh, don't get me wrong. You're a decent enough fellow, and you've certainly been generous with our family." Gilbert's smile had the warmth of a shark's. "But I think we both know that Nicole could have done better." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Lorenzo felt Nicole tense beside him, saw Casey shift uncomfortably in his chair, but his own expression remained perfectly neutral. "I'm not sure I follow," Lorenzo said quietly. Gilbert leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. "Come now, son. Let's be honest about what this is. My daughter is doing charity work by marrying you. Beautiful girl from a good family, taking pity on a foster kid with more money than breeding." The silence that followed was deafening. Lorenzo could hear his own heartbeat, feel the familiar calm that had served him well in combat zones settling over his mind. This was the moment Gilbert had been building toward, the final humiliation designed to put Lorenzo in his place before they moved to extract whatever final payments they could manage. Lorenzo took a sip of his wine, set the glass down with precise care, and looked directly into Gilbert's eyes. "Thank you for the honesty, sir." The simple response clearly wasn't what Gilbert had expected. He'd wanted anger, hurt, perhaps even tears. Instead, Lorenzo stood calmly, removed his wallet, and placed enough cash on the table to cover not just the meal, but probably the entire week's grocery bill for a normal family. "This should cover everyone's lunch," Lorenzo said politely. "I think I'll be heading home now." He kissed Nicole's forehead. She flinched at the contact, nodded politely to Casey, and walked out without another word. Behind him, he could hear Gilbert's confused voice asking Nicole what the hell had just happened. Lorenzo drove home in perfect silence, his mind already calculating the sequence of events he'd set in motion weeks ago. By the time he reached his penthouse apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, he was smiling. Phase 1 was complete. Gilbert had just provided the final justification Lorenzo needed for what came next. He poured himself a glass of his best whiskey, a 30-year-old Macallan that had cost more than Gilbert's monthly mortgage payment, and settled into his home office. 3 phones sat on his desk, each pre-programmed with specific numbers. At exactly 9 a.m. the next morning, 3 very different conversations would begin. The first call would be to District Attorney Blake Head, a former Army Ranger who'd served in Lorenzo's unit and now ran the Financial Crimes Division for Cook County. The evidence Lorenzo had compiled over the past 6 months would make for very interesting reading. The second would be to Antonio Johns, Gilbert's primary creditor and a man whose patience for unpaid gambling debts had reached its limit weeks ago. Antonio would be very interested to learn about Gilbert's recent attempts to hide assets through shell companies and offshore accounts. The third call would be to Maureen Briggs, the most ruthless divorce attorney in Chicago and a woman who specialized in cases involving financial deception and fraud. Gilbert Raymond wanted to play games with a man who had nothing to lose. Tomorrow, he would learn the difference between having nothing to lose and having everything to gain from revenge. Lorenzo raised his glass in a mock toast to the empty room. "To family," he said aloud, and drank deeply. The war was about to begin, and Gilbert had just surrendered his only advantage, the element of surprise. Chapter 3. The Morning Reckoning. Gilbert Raymond woke at 8:47 a.m. with the kind of hangover that reminded him why doctors advised against mixing vintage scotch with victory celebrations. The previous day's lunch had gone exactly as planned. Lorenzo had been humiliated, put firmly in his place, and most importantly, shown that his money couldn't buy him real acceptance into their world. Gilbert rolled over in his king-sized bed, reaching for the crystal water glass on his nightstand, when his phone buzzed with the first message. The text was from Maureen Briggs, and it was exactly 4 words long. "Call me immediately." "Emergency." Gilbert frowned, struggling to focus through his hangover haze. Maureen was his lawyer, not Casey, who handled the family's genteel legal matters, but Maureen, who specialized in the kind of problems that required more creative solutions. Problems like gambling debts, creditor negotiations, and asset protection strategies that pushed the boundaries of legality. Before he could process this fully, his phone buzzed again. This time it was from Jim Emerson, his accountant. "We need to meet today. Serious problems." Gilbert sat up in bed, his hangover forgotten. Jim was the most unflappable man he knew, a forensic accountant who'd helped the Raymond family navigate IRS audits, offshore banking regulations, and complex trust fund structures. For Jim to use the word serious meant catastrophe. The third text arrived as Gilbert was reaching for his robe. "Hope you slept well. Today should be interesting. L." Gilbert stared at the message, reading it 3 times before the sender's identity fully registered. Lorenzo, his son-in-law, had never sent him a text message before, had barely communicated with him at all outside of formal family gatherings. The phone rang before Gilbert could formulate a response. "Mr. Raymond?" Maureen's voice was sharp, professional, and completely devoid of its usual deferential tone. "We need to talk. Now." "Maureen, it's barely 9 in the morning. What's this about?" "It's about the fact that your son-in-law filed for divorce at 8:30 this morning with documentation that's going to destroy you." Maureen paused, and Gilbert could hear papers rustling in the background. "Gilbert, how much does Lorenzo know about your financial situation?" "What kind of question is that?" "He knows what any son-in-law would know." "Does he know about the Cayman accounts? The shell companies? The money you've been funneling through Nicole's name?" Maureen's voice cut through Gilbert's protest like a blade. "Because he's documented all of it. Every transaction, every hidden asset, every lie you've told about the family's financial situation." Gilbert felt the room spin around him. "That's impossible. There's no way he could have accessed." "Gilbert, the man built cybersecurity companies. Did you really think your password-protected spreadsheets and encrypted emails were going to keep him out?" Maureen sighed heavily. "This gets worse. Much worse." Before Gilbert could respond, his phone buzzed with another call. Jim Emerson's name flashed on the screen. "I have to take this," Gilbert told Maureen. "Don't hang up on me," she warned. "We're not done." Gilbert switched calls. "Jim, thank God." Maureen is saying. "Gilbert, we're fucked." Jim's calm, professional demeanor had vanished completely. "Antonio Johns called me 20 minutes ago. He knows about everything. The fake property transfers, the hidden bank accounts, the money we moved to Nicole's name. Everything." Gilbert's knees gave out, and he collapsed onto the edge of his bed. Antonio Johns was not the kind of man who accepted excuses or payment plans. He was the kind of man who collected debts through methods that didn't require court orders. "How is that possible?" Gilbert whispered. "Someone sent Antonio a complete financial profile, bank statements, property records, tax returns going back 5 years. Professional quality work, the kind that costs serious money." Jim paused. "Gilbert, there's more. The IRS received an anonymous tip this morning about unreported income and potential tax evasion. They're opening an investigation." Gilbert dropped the phone, his mind reeling. This couldn't be coincidence. Lorenzo's text message flashed through his memory. Today should be interesting. He fumbled to reconnect with Maureen, his hands shaking as he tried to work the phone. "Are you back?" Maureen's voice was clipped, impatient. "Maureen, we need to fix this. Whatever Lorenzo thinks he knows." "Gilbert, shut up and listen." Maureen's tone brooked no argument. "Lorenzo isn't just filing for divorce. He's claiming fraud, financial deception, and conspiracy. He has documentation proving that Nicole participated in a scheme to defraud him of over $300,000 through false pretenses and manipulated emotional attachment." Gilbert felt his world tilting. Nicole wouldn't. She loves him. Gilbert, he has recordings. Phone calls, text messages, private conversations. Your daughter and you planning how to extract money from him. Laughing about how easy he was to manipulate. Discussing your gambling debts and how much you needed to steal before filing for divorce. The phone slipped from Gilbert's nerveless fingers. Recordings. Lorenzo had been recording them. For how long? What else did he know? His phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "Mr. Raymond, this is D.A. Blakehead. Please call my office immediately to schedule an interview regarding financial irregularities in your business dealings." This is not optional. Gilbert stared at the message, his mind struggling to process the cascade of disasters. The district attorney. Antonio Johns, the IRS. Lorenzo had orchestrated all of this, somehow coordinating attacks from multiple directions simultaneously. Another text, this one from Lorenzo. The judge signed your arrest warrant. Your accountant says you need to file for bankruptcy. And I filed for divorce, but Nicole will get nothing. Don't mock a man who has nothing to lose. Gilbert's phone rang again. This time the caller ID simply said AJ Enterprises, Antonio John's legitimate business front. With trembling fingers, Gilbert declined the call and immediately tried to reach Nicole. The phone went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. Racing to his bedroom window, Gilbert looked out to see Nicole's BMW missing from the driveway. Had Lorenzo gotten to her first? Had she fled? Or was she part of some larger plan he couldn't yet comprehend? Gilbert's phone buzzed one final time. A text from Casey. Gilbert, I've been retained by another party in a matter involving you. I can no longer represent your interests. You need new counsel immediately. Gilbert sank to his knees on the Persian rug his grandmother had brought back from Istanbul in 1923. In the span of 20 minutes, his entire world had collapsed. His lawyer had abandoned him. His accountant was panicking. His creditor was closing in, and his daughter had vanished. And somewhere in the city, Lorenzo Fitzpatrick was just getting started. The war Gilbert thought he'd won yesterday had actually ended before he'd known it had begun. Now came the reckoning, and Gilbert was beginning to understand just how thoroughly he'd been outplayed. As he knelt on his family's ancestral rug, surrounded by the trappings of 4 generations of Raymond wealth and power, Gilbert Raymond finally grasped the fundamental truth Lorenzo had been trying to teach him. Never underestimate a man who has nothing left to lose, especially when that man has spent months carefully planning how to take everything you hold dear. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Web. Lorenzo stood in his penthouse office, watching the sunrise paint Lake Michigan in shades of gold and crimson. 3 phones lay silent on his mahogany desk. Their work complete for the moment. Phase 2 was now in motion, but the true artistry of his revenge was just beginning. The 4th phone, his personal device, buzzed with an encrypted message from his private investigator, Freddie Cox. Freddie was an ex-Navy SEAL who transitioned into corporate security work, specializing in the kind of information gathering that existed in legal gray areas. For the past 6 months, he'd been Lorenzo's eyes and ears in places Gilbert Raymond never imagined he was being watched. Package delivered to AJ. Subject is mobile. Recommend proceeding to Phase 3. Lorenzo smiled. Antonio Johns had received the complete dossier on Gilbert's hidden assets, just as planned. By now, Gilbert would be receiving some very urgent phone calls from some very dangerous people. But Antonio was only one thread in the web Lorenzo had been weaving. The real masterpiece was what he'd prepared for Nicole. At 10:15 a.m., Nicole Potter, soon to be Nicole Raymond again, sat in the parking lot of a Starbucks in Evanston, staring at her phone in complete panic. She'd awakened to 17 missed calls from her father, 12 text messages that made no sense, and a voicemail from their family lawyer saying he could no longer represent their interests. But it was the email from Lorenzo that had driven her to flee the house she'd shared with him for 18 months. The email contained a single attachment, a video file labeled The Real Nicole. Against her better judgment, she'd opened it. The video was a compilation, professionally edited, showing Nicole in a series of compromising situations over the past year. Phone conversations with friends where she mocked Lorenzo's attempts at affection. Text message exchanges with her father planning their next financial request. Most damning of all, a recording from 3 weeks ago where she told her best friend that she was counting the days until she could dump the tech geek and take half his money. But the video wasn't just evidence, it was a message. The final frame showed a single line of text. Coming soon to a courthouse near you. Lorenzo was going to destroy her publicly. Nicole's hands shook as she tried to call her father again. Still no answer. She tried Casey Hale, their family lawyer. A secretary informed her that Mr. Hale was no longer available to take her calls. She was utterly alone, and for the first time in her privileged life, Nicole Raymond Potter was beginning to understand what genuine fear felt like. Across the city, Gilbert Raymond sat in his study, surrounded by 3 decades of financial documents, tried to make sense of his situation. Maureen Briggs had agreed to meet him at noon, but her tone had made it clear this was a professional courtesy, not a rescue mission. The house felt different now, smaller somehow, as if the walls were closing in. Every family portrait seemed to mock him, every piece of expensive furniture a reminder of the lifestyle he was about to lose. Gilbert's phone rang. Antonio Johns. Mr. Raymond. Antonio's voice carried the kind of calm that preceded violence. I think we need to have a conversation. Antonio, I can explain. No explanations necessary. Your son-in-law has been very thorough in his documentation. I now know exactly how much you owe me, exactly what assets you've been hiding, and exactly how long you've been lying about your ability to pay. Gilbert's mouth went dry. Lorenzo isn't my former son-in-law, then. The man who just filed for divorce from your daughter with evidence that she participated in defrauding him of over $300,000. Antonio paused. Money that should have been coming to me. The line went quiet for a long moment. When Antonio spoke again, his voice had dropped to a whisper. I don't like being lied to, Gilbert. I don't like discovering that my debtors have been hiding assets. And I really don't like learning these things from strangers who have better information about my own business than I do. Antonio, please. I can work something out. You have 48 hours to liquidate everything and bring me what you owe. Everything, Gilbert. The house, the cars, the art, the family jewelry, the offshore accounts, the shell company assets. All of it. Gilbert's vision blurred. That's impossible. I can't liquidate everything in 48 hours. The property alone would take months. Then you'd better hope your former son-in-law is in a forgiving mood, because he's the one who just made this timeline possible. The line went dead. Gilbert stared at his phone, trying to process what he'd just heard. Lorenzo had done more than expose Gilbert's hidden assets. He'd somehow transferred ownership or control of them in a way that made immediate liquidation possible. A new text message appeared on Gilbert's phone from an unknown number. Check your email. With trembling fingers, Gilbert opened his laptop and accessed his personal email. The message from Lorenzo contained a single attachment, a legal document titled Asset Recovery and Transfer Agreement. Gilbert opened the file and felt his blood turn to ice. Lorenzo hadn't just documented Gilbert's hidden assets. He'd gained legal control of them through a combination of fraud claims, spousal asset rights, and some kind of creditor protection mechanism Gilbert didn't fully understand. Lorenzo had positioned himself as the legal representative for asset recovery in the divorce proceedings. In layman's terms, Lorenzo could liquidate everything Gilbert owned to recover the money he'd been defrauded, and Gilbert couldn't stop him. But the document contained one final section that made Gilbert's hands shake, a settlement offer. Lorenzo was offering to release all claims, dismiss all charges, and even provide Gilbert with enough money to cover his debts to Antonio Johns, in exchange for a full public confession, the transfer of specific assets, and one final meeting to discuss terms. Gilbert read the settlement terms 3 times before their full implications became clear. Lorenzo wasn't just offering him a way out. He was offering him a chance to surrender with dignity intact, provided Gilbert was willing to admit publicly that he'd been outplayed by a superior opponent. The alternative, spelled out in clinical legal language, was total destruction. Criminal charges, bankruptcy, public humiliation, and the kind of debt collection methods that Antonio Johns was famous for throughout Chicago's business community. Gilbert looked around his study. 4 generations of Raymond family history, reduced to assets on a balance sheet that Lorenzo Fitzpatrick could liquidate with a single phone call. For the first time in his 62 years of privileged existence, Gilbert Raymond understood what it meant to be completely and utterly defeated. His phone buzzed with a new text from Lorenzo. The meeting is set for tomorrow at noon. Come alone. We have much to discuss. Gilbert stared out the window at the estate his great-grandfather had built, knowing he was seeing it for the last time as its owner. Tomorrow, he would learn the final terms of his surrender to a man he'd tried to humiliate 24 hours earlier. The hunter had become the hunted, and the trap was about to close. Chapter 5. The Confession Chamber. The abandoned warehouse in Chicago's Pilsen district had been one of Lorenzo's first real estate investments, a seemingly derelict building that housed a state-of-the-art data center behind its crumbling facade. It was here, in a space that looked like decay but hummed with technological power, that Lorenzo had chosen to conduct the final act of Gilbert Raymond's destruction. Gilbert arrived exactly at noon, driving his Bentley through streets that felt alien to a man accustomed to Lake Forest's manicured lawns. The warehouse district was a maze of loading docks and chain-link fences, a far cry from the country club conference rooms where Gilbert usually conducted his business. Lorenzo waited inside, standing beside a conference table that looked absurdly formal in the industrial setting. He wore a simple black suit, his posture relaxed but alert, the stance of a man completely in control of his environment. "Gilbert," Lorenzo nodded as the older man entered. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." Gilbert looked around the space, noting the high-end security cameras, the soundproofing materials, and what appeared to be professional video equipment. "What is this place?" "Insurance," Lorenzo replied simply. "Everything that happens here today will be recorded from multiple angles, with audio and video feeds transmitted to secure servers in 3 different states. Call it my guarantee that our conversation remains accurate." Gilbert felt a chill run down his spine. "Lorenzo, whatever you think you're accomplishing." "Sit down, Gilbert." Lorenzo's voice carried an edge that Gilbert had never heard before. "We have a lot to discuss and very little time." Gilbert reluctantly took his seat, noting how the chair positioned him directly facing multiple cameras. The setup felt uncomfortably like an interrogation room. "Let's start with the basics," Lorenzo began, opening a tablet and scrolling through what appeared to be financial documents. "Over the past 18 months, you and your daughter defrauded me of $347,000 through false pretenses, emotional manipulation, and outright theft." "Now wait just a minute. I'm not finished." Lorenzo's eyes remained fixed on the tablet. The money was extracted through a series of manufactured emergencies, false investment opportunities, and fabricated family crises. Every request came through Nicole, leveraging her position as my wife to overcome my natural skepticism. Gilbert opened his mouth to protest, but Lorenzo continued without pause. "You used your daughter as bait, Gilbert. You trained her to manipulate me emotionally, to make me believe I was finally being accepted into a family that actually viewed me with contempt." Lorenzo looked up from the tablet, his eyes cold as winter lake ice. "The question is whether you're going to acknowledge this publicly or whether I'm going to have to prove it in court." "You can't prove." Lorenzo touched his tablet, and the warehouse's sound system came alive with Gilbert's voice. "Beautiful girl from a good family, taking pity on a foster kid with more money than breeding." The recording was crystal clear, obviously taken during the previous day's lunch. Gilbert felt his face flush as he heard his own words played back to him. "I can prove everything, Gilbert. Every lie, every manipulation, every dollar you stole." Lorenzo gestured to a stack of documents on the table. Bank records, text messages, phone conversations, email exchanges. "I have documentation going back 2 years, from before Nicole and I even met." Gilbert's composure finally cracked. 2 years? That's impossible. You couldn't have been. "I wasn't investigating you initially," Lorenzo admitted. "I was investigating Nicole. Her background, her family, her motivations. Standard due diligence when you're considering marriage to someone you've known for 6 months." Gilbert stared at Lorenzo, his mind reeling. "You knew from the beginning?" "I suspected from the beginning. I knew for certain 6 months ago when I found Nicole's second phone." Lorenzo leaned back in his chair. "That's when I transitioned from defense to offense." 6 months, Gilbert whispered. "You've been planning this for 6 months?" "Planning? No, Gilbert. I've been building a case for 6 months. The planning began the moment you opened your mouth yesterday." Lorenzo smiled, and for the first time, Gilbert saw something genuinely frightening in his son-in-law's expression. "Everything that's happened to you in the past 24 hours, the DA's investigation, Antonio Johns calling your debts, your lawyer abandoning you, the IRS audit, all of that was set in motion with 3 phone calls I made after leaving your house." Gilbert felt the room spinning around him. 3 phone calls? 3 phone calls to people who've been waiting for the right information at the right time. Lorenzo stood and began pacing around the table like a predator circling wounded prey. Blake Head has been looking for a financial crimes case that would boost his profile. I gave him a gift-wrapped prosecution that will make his career. Lorenzo paused behind Gilbert's chair. Antonio Johns has been frustrated by your ability to hide assets and avoid payment. I provided him with a complete roadmap to everything you own. Gilbert couldn't bring himself to ask about the third call. And Maureen Briggs has been waiting 18 months for someone to pay her retainer to destroy you in divorce court. Apparently, she's had a grudge against your family since you blackballed her from the country club 10 years ago. Gilbert's voice came out as a croak. What do you want from me? Lorenzo returned to his seat and consulted his tablet. I want you to sign a confession acknowledging that you and Nicole conspired to defraud me. I want a public apology delivered to a list of people I'll provide. And I want you to transfer ownership of 3 specific properties to my name as restitution. And if I refuse? Lorenzo touched his tablet again, and a new document appeared on the screen. Then tomorrow morning, every major newspaper in Chicago will receive a copy of this dossier, along with video evidence of your conspiracy. The DA will proceed with criminal charges that carry a minimum 5-year sentence. Antonio Johns will begin asset seizure proceedings that will leave you homeless. And the IRS will audit every financial transaction you've made in the past decade. Gilbert stared at the screen, seeing his entire life reduced to evidence in a criminal case. You're destroying my family's legacy. Your family's legacy was built on the same kind of manipulation and fraud you tried to use against me, Lorenzo replied coldly. I'm simply revealing what was always there. What about Nicole? Nicole made her choice when she decided to participate in your scheme. She'll face her own consequences. Lorenzo leaned forward. But I'm offering you a chance to minimize the damage to her. Sign the confession, make the apology, transfer the properties, and I'll ensure the criminal charges focus on you rather than her. Gilbert felt tears threatening to spill. She's my daughter. She's an adult who chose to betray her marriage for money. Lorenzo's voice remained implacable. The only question now is whether you're going to accept responsibility for your actions or drag her down with you. Lorenzo slid a pen across the table. The choice is yours, Gilbert. But understand this. You're leaving this building either as a man who took responsibility for his actions or as a defendant in multiple criminal cases. There is no third option. Gilbert looked at the pen, then at the cameras recording his every expression, then finally at the man he'd tried to humiliate less than 24 hours earlier. Lorenzo Fitzpatrick hadn't just won this war. He'd annihilated his enemies so thoroughly that surrender was their only remaining dignity. With shaking hands, Gilbert Raymond reached for the pen. Chapter 6. The Price of Betrayal. The signing took less than 5 minutes, but Gilbert Raymond aged a decade in that time. As he scratched his signature across document after document, he could feel 4 generations of family pride crumbling beneath the weight of his own arrogance. Lorenzo watched impassively as Gilbert worked through the stack of papers. Confession, asset transfers, public apology statements. Each signature was another nail in the coffin of the Raymond legacy. There, Gilbert said finally, dropping the pen as if it had burned him. It's done. Are you satisfied? I'm never satisfied, Gilbert. I'm thorough. Lorenzo gathered the documents and fed them into a high-speed scanner. These will be distributed to the relevant parties within the hour. Your criminal attorney, and you'll need one, will receive copies by close of business today. Gilbert slumped in his chair, the fight finally gone out of him. What happens now? Now you go home and begin the process of explaining to Nicole why her world is about to collapse. Lorenzo's voice carried no hint of sympathy. The divorce proceedings will be finalized within 60 days. The criminal case will move forward according to the DA's timeline, and you'll discover what it's like to rebuild your life with nothing. Nothing. Gilbert looked up sharply. The settlement terms said, the settlement terms guaranteed that I wouldn't pursue additional damages beyond what you've already lost. They didn't guarantee that you'd have anything left after paying Antonio Johns what you owe him. Lorenzo smiled coldly. You might want to review the math on that transaction. Gilbert's face went white as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered one final time. Even the settlement was designed to leave him with barely enough to survive. You've destroyed my family, Gilbert whispered. No, Gilbert. You destroyed your family the moment you decided to treat your daughter like a commodity and your son-in-law like a mark. Lorenzo stood and walked toward the warehouse exit. I simply revealed the consequences of choices you made long before we ever met. As Gilbert sat alone in the warehouse, surrounded by the technology that had enabled his defeat, he finally understood the true scope of Lorenzo's revenge. This hadn't been about money or property or even justice. This had been about teaching a lesson in humility to a man who'd never learned the value of anything he couldn't buy or inherit. Across town, Nicole sat in her childhood bedroom at the Raymond estate, staring at the divorce papers that had been hand-delivered by a courier 30 minutes earlier. The documents were devastating in their clinical precision, outlining not just the financial fraud but her active participation in it. But it was the attached note from Lorenzo that brought her to tears. Nicole, I loved you. I would have given you everything you ever wanted, simply because it would have made you happy. The irony is that you could have had it all honestly, but you chose to take it dishonestly instead. I hope the money was worth it, because it's all you're going to have left. The truth of those words hit Nicole like a physical blow. Lorenzo would have given her anything, had given her anything she'd asked for over the past 18 months. The clothes, the jewelry, the cars, the vacations, all freely offered by a man who desperately wanted to belong to something larger than himself. She'd never needed to manipulate him. She'd never needed to steal from him. She could have simply asked, and he would have said yes to almost anything. But her father had convinced her that Lorenzo was the enemy, that his wealth was temporary, that their family name and connections would outlast his technology money. Gilbert had poisoned her against her own husband before she'd even given the marriage a real chance. Now, as she read through the evidence Lorenzo had compiled, Nicole saw their entire relationship from his perspective. Every lie she'd told, every manipulation she'd participated in, every moment she'd chosen her father's greed over her husband's love. She destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to her for $347,000 that was going to disappear into her father's debts anyway. Nicole's phone rang. Lorenzo's name appeared on the caller ID. Hello. Her voice came out as a whisper. I wanted to give you the opportunity to hear this from me rather than reading about it in tomorrow's papers, Lorenzo said without preamble. Your father has confessed to conspiracy to commit fraud. The DA will be filing charges within the week. Lorenzo, please. I know you have every right to be angry, but I'm not angry, Nicole. Anger implies that I still care enough to have an emotional reaction to your choices. Lorenzo's voice was perfectly calm, which somehow made it more devastating than if he'd been screaming. I'm simply informing you of facts. Nicole closed her eyes, feeling the last of her hope die. What about us? Is there any chance? There is no us, Nicole. There never was. Us was a fiction you and your father created to facilitate theft. Lorenzo paused. The divorce will be final in 60 days. After that, we'll have no reason to ever speak again. I loved you, Nicole whispered, surprising herself with the truth of it. No, you didn't. You love what I could provide. There's a difference. Lorenzo's voice softened slightly. For what it's worth, I believe you might have learned to love me eventually, if your father hadn't poisoned that possibility from the beginning. But we'll never know now. The line went dead. Nicole sat in the silence of her childhood room, surrounded by the relics of a privileged life that was about to vanish forever. The designer clothes, the expensive jewelry, the casual luxury she'd always taken for granted. All of it would soon be gone, liquidated to pay for her father's gambling debts and her own legal defense. She thought about calling Lorenzo back, begging him for another chance, promising to make amends. But she knew it was pointless. She'd seen that look in his eyes during their confrontations over the past day. The look of a man who'd completely written off everyone and everything associated with his betrayal. Lorenzo Fitzpatrick was done with the Raymond family. And Nicole was beginning to understand that in losing him, she'd lost the only person who'd ever been willing to love her for who she was rather than what she represented. The irony was crushing. In trying to take everything from him, she'd lost everything that actually mattered. Downstairs, Gilbert's Bentley pulled into the driveway. Nicole could hear her father's heavy footsteps on the marble floor, could hear him calling her name. Soon, they would have to face the consequences of their choices together. Father and daughter, united at last in the destruction they'd brought upon themselves. Outside, the sun was setting over Lake Forest, painting the Raymond estate in shades of gold and crimson that looked remarkably like fire. Chapter 7. The Reckoning Begins. 3 weeks after Gilbert Raymond signed his confession in a Pilsen warehouse, Chicago's elite social circles buzzed with the most scandalous downfall in recent memory. The Raymond family's disgrace had become the stuff of cautionary tales told in hushed tones at country club dining tables across the North Shore. The Chicago Tribune's financial section had featured a devastating expose titled "Old Money, New Crimes: How the Raymond Empire Crumbled." The article, written with obvious access to insider information, detailed 4 generations of questionable financial practices that had culminated in Gilbert's systematic fraud against his own son-in-law. But it was the Cook County DA's press conference that had truly buried the Raymond name. District Attorney Blake Head stood behind a podium laden with evidence boxes, his military bearing commanding the room's attention. Today, we're announcing charges against Gilbert Raymond and Nicole Potter in what may be the most brazen case of matrimonial fraud in Cook County history. Blake outlined the case with prosecutorial precision: conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. The evidence was overwhelming, he explained, thanks to the cooperation of the victim who had provided extraordinary documentation of the crimes against him. This case serves as a reminder that fraud is fraud, regardless of the social status of the perpetrators or the sophistication of their methods. Blake continued, "The people of Cook County deserve to know that no one is above the law." The press conference had aired live on 3 local networks and been picked up by national financial news programs. By evening, Gilbert Raymond had become the face of white-collar crime, his mugshot appearing beside headlines about the charity marriage scandal. Lorenzo watched the coverage from his office, feeling no satisfaction from Gilbert's public humiliation. Revenge, he discovered, was a dish that left an odd aftertaste. Necessary, perhaps, but not particularly nourishing. His assistant, Teresa Spears, knocked on his office door. "Mr. Fitzpatrick? There's someone here to see you. Says it's personal." Lorenzo looked up from his computer screen. "I'm not taking any media interviews." "It's not media, sir. It's Nicole Potter." Lorenzo considered this for a long moment. He'd been expecting this visit ever since the charges had been announced. "Send her in, but ask security to remain nearby." Nicole entered his office looking nothing like the polished society wife he'd married. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her makeup minimal, her clothing expensive but worn, the appearance of someone whose world had recently collapsed but who was trying to maintain dignity in the ruins. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, taking the chair across from his desk without invitation. Lorenzo studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation he'd grown accustomed to recognizing. Instead, he saw something that surprised him: genuine remorse. "You have 5 minutes," he said. Nicole nodded, as if she'd expected no more. "I wanted to apologize. Not because I think it will change anything, but because you deserve to hear it. I've heard a lot of apologies lately. Most of them have been court-ordered. This isn't." Nicole met his eyes directly. "I participated in defrauding you of money, yes. But more than that, I stole your trust. I stole the chance for us to have a real marriage. I stole your belief that someone could love you for who you are rather than what you could provide." Lorenzo remained silent, his expression unreadable. "My father spent my entire life teaching me that people were resources to be managed, that relationships were transactions to be optimized." Nicole's voice remained steady, but Lorenzo could see the effort it required. "I believed him because it was easier than questioning everything I've been raised to think was normal." "That sounds like an explanation, not an apology." "You're right." Nicole took a breath. "I'm sorry, Lorenzo. I'm sorry I chose my father's greed over your love. I'm sorry I betrayed you when you offered me everything I could have wanted honestly. And I'm sorry it took losing everything to make me understand what I'd thrown away. Lorenzo leaned back in his chair. What do you want from me, Nicole? Nothing. I know I can't undo what I did. I know you'll never trust me again, and I don't blame you for that. She paused. I just wanted you to know that somewhere in all the lies, there were moments when my feelings for you were real. Well, I forgot about my father's plan and just enjoyed being married to someone who made me laugh. But not enough moments to change your behavior. No, not enough moments. Nicole stood to leave. For what it's worth, you were right about something you said during the divorce mediation. I could have had everything I wanted if I'd just been honest with you. The irony is that I threw away the only real relationship I've ever had for money that's going to disappear anyway. She moved toward the door, then stopped. I know you probably don't care, but I'm testifying against my father. The DA offered me a plea deal if I cooperate fully. Lorenzo nodded. This wasn't surprising. Blakehead had mentioned the possibility during one of their strategy sessions. Goodbye, Lorenzo. I hope someday you find someone who deserves what you were willing to give me. After Nicole left, Lorenzo sat in his office watching the sun set over Lake Michigan. The city spread out below him. 8 million people living their lives, most of them blissfully unaware that the Raymond family drama had ever existed. His phone buzzed with a text from Freddie Cox. AJ's people visited Gilbert this morning. No violence, just a conversation about timeline expectations. Subject appeared to understand the urgency. Lorenzo deleted the message. Antonio Johns was handling his own business now, collecting the debts that Gilbert could no longer hide. That was no longer Lorenzo's concern. Another message, this one from Blakehead. Nicole Potter accepted the plea deal. She'll testify next month. Gilbert's attorney is pushing for a plea as well. Looks like this won't go to trial. Lorenzo wasn't surprised. Gilbert's confession, combined with the documentary evidence, made a trial essentially unwinnable. Any competent defense attorney would push for the best plea deal available. A third message from an unknown number. Mr. Fitzpatrick, this is Floyd Hubbard from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. We'd like to discuss some information that's come to light during our review of the Raymond case. Are you available for a meeting this week? Lorenzo stared at this message for a long time. The FBI's involvement suggested that Gilbert's crimes extended beyond what Lorenzo had uncovered. Perhaps there were other victims, other schemes that had gone undetected until Lorenzo's investigation had shown a light into the Raymond family's financial practices. He typed back, I'm available at your convenience. Within minutes, he had a response scheduling a meeting for Friday morning. Lorenzo smiled for the first time in weeks. It seemed Gilbert Raymond's reckoning was just beginning. The local charges had been only the opening act. The federal government was preparing for the main event. As he gathered his papers and prepared to leave the office, Lorenzo reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this moment. 6 months ago, he'd been a successful but lonely man, desperate for the acceptance and love he thought marriage would provide. Now he was still successful, still lonely, but no longer desperate. He learned that love couldn't be bought, respect couldn't be inherited, and revenge, while satisfying, couldn't fill the emptiness that came from betrayal. But he'd also learned something else. He was stronger than he'd ever imagined. Strong enough to survive the worst kind of betrayal, smart enough to turn the tables on his enemies, and patient enough to see justice served with surgical precision. Gilbert Raymond had tried to break him, had tried to reduce him to nothing more than a source of easy money. Instead, he'd unleashed something far more dangerous. A man who discovered exactly how much he was capable of when pushed beyond his limits. The war was nearly over, but Lorenzo suspected the victory would taste different than he'd expected. Chapter 8. Federal Complications. FBI Special Agent Floyd Hubbard had the kind of face that suggested he'd seen humanity at its worst and had long since stopped being surprised by it. His office in the Chicago Federal Building was spartanly furnished, with case files stacked neatly on metal shelves and a bulletin board covered with photographs and financial flowcharts that told the story of white-collar crimes spanning multiple states. Lorenzo sat across from Hubbard's desk, studying the agent's expression for clues about why the Bureau had taken interest in what appeared to be a local fraud case. Mr. Fitzpatrick, Hubbard began, opening a thick file folder. Your investigation into Gilbert Raymond's financial activities has opened a door we've been trying to open for several years. I wasn't aware the FBI had prior interest in the Raymond family. Not the family specifically. The network. Hubbard pulled out a series of photographs showing various men in expensive suits at social gatherings. Gilbert Raymond was part of a group that's been laundering money for some very unsavory clients. Your documentation of his hidden accounts and shell companies has helped us map a pipeline that extends from Chicago to the Cayman Islands. Lorenzo leaned forward. Money laundering? Raymond and 5 other Chicago businessmen have been cleaning money for everyone from drug cartels to arms dealers. They use their legitimate businesses and social connections to make dirty money look like investment returns and family wealth. Hubbard pointed to one of the photographs. The gambling debts you uncovered? Those weren't just personal vice. Gilbert was using his gambling losses as a way to explain cash shortfalls when laundering operations went wrong. So, Antonio Johns is clean as far as we can tell, but some of Gilbert's other creditors aren't. Hubbard showed Lorenzo another photograph. This one surveillance footage of Gilbert meeting with a man Lorenzo didn't recognize. That's Viktor Kozlov, a Russian businessman who's been using Chicago real estate to clean money from Eastern European arms deals. Gilbert helped him purchase and renovate 3 properties in the past 2 years. Lorenzo felt a chill run down his spine. Are you saying I inadvertently exposed a Russian money laundering operation? More than exposed. Disrupted. Hubbard smiled grimly. When you forced Gilbert to liquidate those hidden assets, you essentially froze accounts that contained money belonging to some very dangerous people. People who don't appreciate having their financial operations disrupted by domestic disputes. The implications hit Lorenzo like a physical blow. Are you saying I'm in danger? We don't think so, not directly. You're clearly the victim here, and going after you would only draw more federal attention. Hubbard paused. But Gilbert and Nicole are a different story. They've become liabilities to people who solve problems permanently. Lorenzo stared at the photographs scattered across Hubbard's desk. What do you need from me? Your cooperation in building a federal case against the entire network. We can offer you protection if necessary. But more importantly, we can offer you something I think you'll find interesting. The chance to hurt these people far worse than anything you've done to Gilbert so far. Hubbard opened another folder, this one containing financial documents that dwarfed Lorenzo's own investigation. Gilbert Raymond's fraud against you was amateur hour compared to what this network has been doing. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, multiple international crimes, and connections to organizations that make Antonio Johns look like a Sunday school teacher. Lorenzo studied the documents, his analytical mind quickly grasping the scope of the operation. How long have you been investigating this? 3 years. But until your case broke everything open, we couldn't prove the connections. Hubbard leaned back in his chair. Your methodical documentation of Gilbert's crimes has provided us with the key to a much larger door. We'd like you to help us walk through it. What would that involve? Testifying before a federal grand jury, allowing us to use your evidence in expanded investigations. And possibly, Hubbard paused, as if weighing his next words carefully, helping us gather additional evidence. Lorenzo raised an eyebrow. Are you asking me to wear a wire? I'm asking you to consider all options for bringing these people to justice. Gilbert Raymond tried to destroy you for a few $100,000. These people have destroyed entire families for business purposes. Hubbard showed Lorenzo a final photograph, a family portrait of a man, woman, and 2 young children. The Kowalski family, Chicago-based accountants who stumbled onto irregularities in Viktor Kozlov's real estate transactions. They tried to report it to authorities. What happened to them? Car accident on the Dan Ryan Expressway 6 months ago. Brake failure in all 4 vehicles of a motorcade that was investigating financial crimes. Hubbard's expression was stone cold. The kind of brake failure that requires very specific technical knowledge to arrange. Lorenzo felt something shift inside him. A transformation from the controlled anger that had driven his revenge against Gilbert to something colder and more dangerous. These weren't just white-collar criminals playing financial games. These were murderers who used money as a weapon. "If I help you," Lorenzo said carefully, "what happens to Gilbert and Nicole?" Gilbert becomes a federal witness whether he wants to or not. His local fraud case becomes the least of his problems. Hubbard gathered the photographs. As for Nicole, that depends on how cooperative she is and how much she actually knew about her father's larger activities. And if these people decide Gilbert and Nicole know too much, Hubbard met Lorenzo's eyes directly. Then they become federal witnesses in protective custody rather than corpses in Lake Michigan. Lorenzo stood and walked to the window, looking down at the Chicago streets where millions of people went about their daily lives, unaware of the shadow world of international crime that operated in their city. 6 months ago, he'd wanted nothing more than to belong somewhere, to be part of a family that valued him. Now he was being asked to help dismantle a criminal network that threatened the safety of innocent people. The choice should have been obvious, but Lorenzo found himself thinking about Nicole's visit to his office, the genuine remorse he'd seen in her eyes, the possibility that she might be an unwitting victim of her father's larger schemes. "Agent Hubbard," Lorenzo said without turning from the window, "if I do this, I want guarantees about Nicole's safety. Whatever she did to me, she doesn't deserve to die for her father's crimes." "Agreed. And I want to know everything. No surprises, no classified information that might get me killed because I stumbled into something I didn't understand." "Also agreed." Lorenzo turned back to face the FBI agent. "Then let's bring down some criminals." Hubbard smiled, the first genuine expression Lorenzo had seen from him. "Mr. Fitzpatrick, I think this is going to be the beginning of a very productive partnership." As Lorenzo left the federal building, he realized that his war with Gilbert Raymond had been just the opening skirmish in a much larger battle. The stakes had escalated beyond personal revenge to something that might actually matter: protecting innocent people from predators who used wealth and social position as cover for deadly crimes. Gilbert Raymond had wanted to destroy a man who had nothing to lose. Instead, he'd awakened someone who now had everything to fight for. Chapter 9: The Final Justice. 6 months later, Lorenzo stood in the witness box of a federal courtroom, facing a jury that had been hearing testimony for 3 weeks about one of the largest international money laundering operations ever prosecuted in the Northern District of Illinois. The courtroom was packed with reporters, federal agents, and family members of victims whose stories had emerged during the investigation. Gilbert Raymond sat at the defendant's table, looking 20 years older than he had at that Sunday lunch that seemed like a lifetime ago. Beside him sat 5 other men whose arrogance had been replaced by the hollow stare of criminals facing life sentences. U.S. Attorney Christina Gross approached the witness stand with the confident stride of a prosecutor who knew she held all the cards. "Mr. Fitzpatrick, can you tell the jury how your personal investigation in a fraud committed by Gilbert Raymond led to the discovery of this international criminal conspiracy?" Lorenzo had told this story dozens of times to investigators, grand juries, and congressional committees, but this was the moment that mattered. The moment when justice would finally be served not just for him, but for all the victims of Gilbert's network. "It began with a simple desire to understand why my wife was lying to me," Lorenzo said, his voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "I never intended to uncover a criminal conspiracy. I was just trying to protect myself from what I thought was simple marital fraud." Lorenzo walked the jury through his methodical investigation, the discovery of hidden accounts, the documentation of fraudulent transactions, and finally, the realization that Gilbert's crimes extended far beyond stealing from his son-in-law. "When I began freezing Mr. Raymond's hidden assets as part of my divorce proceedings, I started receiving phone calls from people who claimed I was interfering with their business interests," Lorenzo continued. "That's when I realized that Gilbert Raymond wasn't just stealing from me. He was laundering money for international criminals." Christina Gross nodded. "And what did you do with this information?" "I contacted the FBI immediately. I realized I was in over my head and that innocent people might be in danger because of what I'd uncovered." The prosecutor walked Lorenzo through the cooperation phase. The months of wearing recording devices, the carefully orchestrated meetings with targets, the painstaking work of building cases against people who killed witnesses as casually as they balanced checkbooks. "Mr. Fitzpatrick," Christina Gross said, approaching the climax of her examination, "do you see in this courtroom the man who defrauded you of $347,000 and launched this entire investigation?" "Yes." "Gilbert Raymond, seated at the defendant's table. And in your opinion, was Mr. Raymond's fraud against you connected to his participation in this larger criminal conspiracy?" "Absolutely. The money he stole from me was used to cover shortfalls in laundering operations that had gone wrong. He was stealing from family to pay international criminals." Lorenzo looked directly at Gilbert as he delivered this testimony. The older man's eyes were filled with a mixture of hatred, defeat, and something that might have been regret. The defense attorney's cross-examination was brutal, but ultimately futile. Lorenzo's documentation was too thorough, his cooperation with federal investigators too complete, his testimony too consistent to be meaningfully challenged. When Lorenzo finally stepped down from the witness stand, he felt not triumph, but a profound sense of closure. The scared, desperate man who had discovered his wife's betrayal 18 months ago had evolved into someone who could stare down international criminals and help put them in prison. Nicole had testified 3 days earlier as part of her plea agreement. She'd received 2 years in federal prison for her role in the fraud, but her cooperation had helped prosecutors understand the full scope of her father's crimes. She looked directly at Lorenzo when she left the courthouse, mouthing "thank you" before being led away by federal marshals. Lorenzo understood her gratitude. By exposing the larger conspiracy, he'd probably saved her life. Gilbert's criminal partners had little patience for loose ends, and Nicole would have been eliminated along with her father if the FBI hadn't intervened. The verdicts came down on a Friday afternoon in late autumn. Guilty on all counts for all 6 defendants. Gilbert Raymond received 25 years in federal prison for money laundering, fraud, and conspiracy. At 63, it was effectively a life sentence. As Lorenzo watched the defendants being led away in shackles, he felt a hand on his shoulder. FBI agent Floyd Hubbard had become something like a friend over the months they'd worked together. "How does it feel?" Hubbard asked. Lorenzo considered the question carefully. "Different than I expected. When this started, I wanted to hurt Gilbert Raymond for what he'd done to me. Now," Lorenzo paused, watching Gilbert disappear through the courtroom door for the last time. "Now I'm just glad he can't hurt anyone else." "That's growth," Hubbard said. "Most people never make the transition from personal revenge to public justice." Lorenzo smiled. "Most people never have their personal revenge intersect with a federal investigation." Outside the courthouse, reporters waited with cameras and questions. Lorenzo had become something of a celebrity, the man who'd brought down an international criminal conspiracy while trying to save his marriage. Publishers wanted book deals, Hollywood producers wanted movie rights, and television networks wanted exclusive interviews. Lorenzo walked past them all without comment. The story belonged to the victims now, not to him. He drove home to the penthouse apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, the same space where he'd planned Gilbert's destruction 18 months earlier. But the man who entered that apartment was fundamentally different from the one who'd left it. He'd learned that love couldn't be bought or stolen, that justice was more satisfying than revenge, and that sometimes the most personal betrayals led to the most public good. Most importantly, he learned that being underestimated was the greatest advantage a man could have, as long as he was smart enough to use it properly. Lorenzo poured himself a glass of the 30-year-old Macallan, the same bottle he'd opened the night he'd planned his revenge. But instead of drinking to Gilbert's destruction, he raised his glass to something else entirely. "To new beginnings," he said aloud to the empty apartment. And for the first time in 2 years, Lorenzo Fitzpatrick smiled with genuine happiness. The war was over. Justice had been served. And somewhere in the future, there was a life waiting to be built on the foundation of lessons learned through betrayal, revenge, and ultimately, redemption. Gilbert Raymond had tried to mock a man who had nothing to lose. Instead, He taught him that a man with nothing left to lose was capable of changing everything. Epilogue. 2 years later, Lorenzo received a letter forwarded through the federal prison system. Gilbert Raymond's handwriting was shakier than he remembered, but the words were clear. Lorenzo, I know I have no right to contact you, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that I've had a lot of time to think about what I did to you and Nicole. You were right about everything. The man who mocked you at that lunch was scared, desperate, and stupid. The man writing this letter understands that you saved both our lives by stopping me before I got us both killed. I hope someday Nicole will understand that too. I'm sorry for everything. Gilbert. Lorenzo read the letter twice, then filed it away without responding. Some apologies were meant to heal the person offering them rather than the person receiving them. Gilbert would have to find his own path to redemption. As for Lorenzo, he'd found something better than revenge. He'd found peace. And sometimes, peace was the greatest victory of all. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Rob Gonzalez had built his empire from nothing. At 45, he owned 3 construction companies across Texas, a luxury car dealership, and enough real estate to make most men comfortable for life. But Rob wasn't most men. He was methodical, calculating, and possessed a memory that forgot nothing and forgave even less. His father, Manuel Gonzalez, had been a ruthless businessman who taught Rob one fundamental rule. Trust is a luxury only fools can afford. Everyone will betray you given the right price. Rob had learned this lesson well, applying it to every relationship except one, his family. Rachel Gonzalez, his wife of 20 years, had been different, or so he believed. She was a real estate agent when they met, ambitious and beautiful, with honey blonde hair and green eyes that could convince anyone to sign a contract. She pursued him relentlessly, and Rob, still young and idealistic, had fallen for her charm. Their daughter Nicole was 17 now, a senior at St. Catherine's Preparatory School. She had inherited Rob's determination and Rachel's persuasive abilities, but unlike her mother, Nicole genuinely loved her father. She worked part-time at a local cafe, saving every penny for months to buy Rob something special for Father's Day. The Gonzalez family lived in a sprawling mansion in the hills outside Austin, complete with a 6-car garage, infinity pool, and enough security cameras to monitor a small town. Rob had installed them all himself. He trusted no one else with his family's safety. On this particular Thursday evening, Rob sat in his home office reviewing contracts when Nicole burst through the door, her dark eyes sparkling with excitement. "Dad, I need to show you something," she said, pulling out her phone. "I've been saving for 6 months, and I finally have enough." She showed him a screenshot from a luxury watch retailer. A Patek Philippe Nautilus, $3,000. Rob's expression softened, a rare occurrence that only Nicole could provoke. "Sweetheart, that's too much money. You don't need to. I want it, Dad. You work so hard for us, and you never buy anything for yourself. Mom's always getting new jewelry and trips, but you give and give." Nicole's voice carried a maturity beyond her years. "Besides, I already put down a deposit. I'm picking it up tomorrow after school for Father's Day." Rob felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest, pride mixed with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. "Love. Nicole, thank you. That means more to me than you know." After Nicole left, Rob returned to his paperwork, but his mind wandered. Perhaps his father had been wrong. Perhaps some people could be trusted completely. He was wrong. Chapter 2. The Betrayal. Friday afternoon arrived with the oppressive heat typical of Texas summers. Rob was in the middle of a conference call with investors when his phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Changed my mind. Taking the money for my vacation with James. The watch can wait." Rob stared at the message, reading it 3 times before the words fully registered. The investors' voices faded into background noise as a cold fury settled in his chest. The same feeling he'd experienced as a child watching his father's business partners try to cheat him. James. Lance Barrett. Rob knew exactly who that was. Lance Barrett was Rachel's fitness trainer, a 32-year-old pretty boy with bleached teeth and muscles that looked better than they performed. Rob had tolerated the training sessions, even paid for them, because Rachel claimed she needed to stay in shape for her real estate career. But vacation? With her trainer? Rob ended the conference call without explanation and immediately called Nicole. She answered on the first ring. Dad, I'm at the jewelry store right now. The watch is gorgeous. You're going to? Nicole, has your mother contacted you today? Yeah, about an hour ago. She said she needed the money for something more important. I don't understand, Dad. I've been saving for 6 months. She knows how important this is to me. Rob's grip tightened on the phone. Where are you exactly? Still at Harper's Jewelers on 5th Street. Mr. Harper said he'd hold the watch until 5 o'clock, but after that, Nicole's voice trailed off, thick with disappointment. Stay there. I'm coming. Rob hung up and opened his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. Within minutes, he'd accessed Rachel's credit card statements, phone records, and social media accounts. The picture that emerged was clearer than he'd expected. Rachel and Lance had been planning this trip for weeks. Cabo San Lucas, a 5-star resort, premium suite. The total cost? Exactly $3,000, Nicole's gift money. But the vacation was just the surface. Text messages revealed an affair that had been going on for 8 months. Photos showed intimate dinners, weekend getaways when Rachel claimed to be at real estate conferences, and enough evidence to bury her in any divorce proceeding. Rob's father had been right after all. He drove to the jewelry store in his black Mercedes AMG, his mind already formulating plans. When he arrived, Nicole was sitting outside on a bench, her head in her hands. Dad, I'm so sorry. I wanted to give you something special, and now. Nicole. Rob's voice was calm, controlled. Look at me. She raised her tear-stained face. Your mother made a choice today, a choice that reveals who she really is. But you? Rob's hand gently touched her shoulder. You showed me who you are. The intent matters more than the outcome. But the watch will be on my wrist tomorrow. Rob pulled out his platinum credit card. We're buying it right now. But first, I need you to do something for me. Nicole wiped her eyes. Anything. I need you to act like nothing happened. Can you do that? Pretend you're okay with your mother's decision, at least until Sunday. Nicole studied her father's face. She'd inherited his intelligence, and she could see something dangerous brewing behind his dark eyes. Dad, what are you planning? Justice, Rob replied simply. Your mother thinks she can steal from you, betray our family, and face no consequences. She's about to learn otherwise. They walked into Harper's Jewelers together. Rob bought the watch and handed it to Nicole. Happy Father's Day, he said, from the only family member who truly understands loyalty. That evening, Rob sat in his office making phone calls. The first was to Garrett Williamson, his head of security and a former military contractor. The second was to Frank Waters, a private investigator who specialized in surveillance. The third was to his lawyer, Theodore Farrell, who had helped Rob navigate every major business deal for the past decade. Theo, I need you to prepare divorce papers. Adultery, theft from a minor, and anything else you can think of. But don't file them yet. Rob, what's going on? My wife is about to discover that betraying a Gonzalez comes with a price she never imagined. Chapter 3, The Calm Before. Saturday morning dawned clear and hot. Rachel was in the kitchen making coffee when Rob entered, freshly showered and dressed for his morning run. He observed her carefully, the way she avoided eye contact, the nervous energy in her movements, the guilt she tried to hide behind casual conversation. Good morning, honey, Rachel said, her voice artificially bright. Sleep well. Like a rock. Rob poured himself coffee, his tone neutral. What are your plans today? Oh, just some errands. Maybe lunch with the girls. Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. Actually, I might need to go out of town for a few days. There's a real estate conference in Dallas. Rob nodded thoughtfully. Sounds important. When do you leave? Tomorrow morning, early. Rachel's relief was visible. "I'll probably be gone until Wednesday." "I'll miss you," Rob said, and meant it in a way Rachel couldn't possibly understand. He would miss having a target for his anger so close at hand. After Rachel left for her errands, which Rob knew was a final planning session with Lance, Rob spent the morning implementing the first phase of his plan. He called his daughter into his office. "Nicole, I need to tell you something, and it's going to hurt." Rob showed her printouts of the text messages between Rachel and Lance. "Your mother is having an affair." Nicole's face went through a series of emotions: shock, disbelief, hurt, and finally, anger. "How long?" 8 months. "And the vacation money?" "Was always intended for her lover. Your gift was just convenient timing." Rob's voice was gentle but firm. "Nicole, I want you to understand something. Your mother's betrayal isn't your fault, and it doesn't reflect on you. But it does reveal something important about character." Nicole was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steel. "What do you need me to do?" Rob smiled. Not the warm smile he reserved for his daughter, but the cold expression his business competitors had learned to fear. "Tomorrow morning, your mother leaves for her vacation. I want you to text her around noon, asking if she's having a good time at her conference. Act normal, like you believe her story." "Why?" "Because your mother's going to spend the next few days believing she's gotten away with betraying our family. She's going to relax, let her guard down, enjoy herself with her lover. And when she's at her happiest, when she feels most secure." Rob didn't finish the sentence, but Nicole understood. She'd seen that look in her father's eyes before, usually right before a business rival found themselves destroyed and bankrupted. That evening, the family had dinner together, a farewell meal, though only Rob knew it was truly goodbye. Rachel chatted nervously about her upcoming conference, while Lance sent her encouraging texts that made her phone buzz every few minutes. Nicole played her part perfectly, asking innocent questions about Dallas and real estate trends. Rob contributed just enough to the conversation to seem engaged while internally cataloging every lie, every deception, every moment of betrayal. After dinner, Rachel went upstairs to pack. Rob followed her, standing in the doorway of their bedroom as she carefully folded lingerie and summer dresses, clothes clearly intended for seduction, not business meetings. "Rachel," he said softly. She turned, and for a moment, Rob saw fear flicker in her green eyes. "Yes, have a wonderful trip." The fear faded, replaced by relief and guilt. "Thank you, honey. I love you." "I know you do," Rob replied. "In your own way." After Rachel fell asleep, Rob returned to his office and made more calls. Garrett had confirmed that Lance Barrett would be picking Rachel up at 6 a.m. Frank had already planted tracking devices in both their vehicles and was monitoring their phones. Theodore had prepared not just divorce papers, but a comprehensive legal strategy that would leave Rachel with nothing. But Rob's plans extended far beyond legal proceedings. He opened his laptop and began typing detailed instructions to his network of contacts. Men and women who owed him favors, who feared him, or who simply respected his power. Construction workers, real estate agents, private security firms, journalists, social media influencers, and city officials. By dawn, Rob had assembled an army of people who would help him orchestrate Rachel and Lance's destruction. Not through illegal activities or corporate fraud, but through a carefully orchestrated campaign that would systematically dismantle every aspect of their lives. As he watched Rachel's suitcase disappear into Lance Barrett's BMW at 6 a.m. sharp, Rob felt the familiar calm that came before battle. His father had taught him that betrayal was inevitable, but he'd failed to teach the second part of the lesson, that betrayal must always be punished. Rob Gonzalez was about to provide that education. Chapter 4. The Hunt Begins. By the time Rachel and Lance reached their first stop in San Antonio, Rob had already set the first phase of his plan in motion. Frank Waters called at 9 a.m. with a status report. "They stopped at the Hyatt for breakfast," Frank reported. "Very cozy. Lots of public displays of affection. Lance paid with his credit card, which, by the way, is already maxed out. Your wife seems to be financing this entire operation." Rob sat in his office, watching security footage of his property on multiple monitors. "What else?" Lance Barrett is deeper in debt than we initially thought. 3 credit cards maxed, behind on his truck payments, and he owes his gym landlord 4 months' rent. This vacation is being paid for entirely by your wife's personal account. Perfect. What about their accommodations in Cabo? Premium suite at the Grand Solmar Resort. 5 nights, all meals included, spa treatments. Total cost is actually closer to $4,000. Looks like Lance convinced her to upgrade using her own credit card. Rob made notes on a legal pad. Frank, I want you to stay close, but not too close. Document everything. Every meal, every drink, every intimate moment. I want a complete record of how they spend Nicole's money. Already on it. I got a contact at the resort who'll provide photos and video surveillance. Completely legal since it's all taken in public areas. After Frank hung up, Rob's next call was to Bernard Hester, a man who specialized in reputation management, though not in the way most people understood the term. Bernard could destroy reputations as efficiently as he could build them. Bernie, I need you to start gathering intelligence on Lance Barrett. Employment history, character references, client complaints, anything you can find. Don't take action yet. Just compile everything. How deep do you want me to dig? Deep enough to find out why a 32-year-old fitness trainer can afford luxury vacations on a salary that barely covers rent. Bernie chuckled. You think he's got other income sources? I think Lance Barrett is exactly the kind of man who would seduce married women for financial gain. I want to know how many other wives he's been training. Rob's third call was to Chuck Hayes, a city building inspector who owed Rob several favors. Chuck, I need you to pay a visit to Barrett's Fitness on Maple Street. Full inspection, electrical, plumbing, fire safety, accessibility compliance, the works. When do you want this done? Wednesday morning. While he's out of town. Rob, if I find violations. You'll find violations, Chuck. Lance Barrett strikes me as the kind of man who cuts corners wherever possible. The rest of Monday was spent laying groundwork. Rob personally visited 3 of his construction sites, ensuring that his workers understood the importance of quality work and customer satisfaction. He wanted to be seen conducting normal business while his wife was betraying their family in Mexico. At lunch, Nicole texted Rachel as planned. Hey Mom, how's the conference? Hope you're learning lots. Rachel's response came an hour later. Great sessions today. Very educational. Love you. The timestamp showed Rachel was at a beachside bar in Cabo, a frozen margarita in her hand and Lance's arm around her waist. That evening, Rob called a family meeting with just Nicole. They sat in his office, the Patek Philippe watch prominent on his wrist. How are you handling this? Rob asked. Nicole was quiet for a moment. I keep thinking about all the times she lied to us. All the business dinners and client meetings that were probably dates with him. It makes me sick. Good. That anger will serve you well in what's coming. Rob opened a folder on his desk. Nicole, I want you to understand something about your mother. This isn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This is who she is. He showed her financial records. Your mother has been systematically stealing from our joint accounts for months. Small amounts, but consistent. She's been building a separate nest egg, probably planning to leave for a while. Nicole's face hardened. She was going to abandon us. She was going to try, but she made a fatal error in judgment. Rob's smile was cold. She assumed I was the same trusting fool she married 20 years ago. What happens when she comes back? She doesn't get to come back, Nicole. Not to this house, not to this family, not to the life she's trying to steal from us. Rob's voice was calm, but Nicole could see the fury burning behind his eyes. Your mother chose her side when she stole your gift money. Now she gets to live with the consequences. Tuesday brought the first wave of Rob's counterattack. Bernie called with his initial findings on Lance Barrett. You were right about the other women, Bernie reported. I found 4 other married clients who've been paying for premium training packages that include overnight sessions and weekend retreats. All wealthy, all married, all conveniently discovering fitness needs right before their husband's business trips. How much is he extracting from them? Anywhere from $500 to $2,000 per month, depending on their financial situation. Your wife seems to be his biggest score yet. Rob felt a familiar satisfaction. His instincts had been correct. Bernie, I want you to contact the other husbands. Anonymously. Send them evidence of their wives' activities. All of them. All of them. By Thursday morning. Wednesday morning brought Chuck Hayes's building inspection results. As expected, Barrett's fitness failed on multiple counts. Outdated electrical systems, insufficient fire exits, and violations of Americans with Disabilities Act requirements. The gym's been red-tagged, Chuck reported. Immediate closure until all violations are corrected. I estimate at least $20,000 in required repairs. Perfect timing, Rob said. Lance Barrett is about to discover that his business no longer exists. Frank called that afternoon with surveillance updates from Cabo. They're living it up pretty thoroughly. 5-star dining every night, couples massages, sunset sailing. Your wife charged another $1,500 in spa treatments this morning. How are they getting along? Lance is playing the perfect boyfriend, but I'm catching some interesting audio through the listening devices. He's been making calls to someone named Erica every night after your wife falls asleep. Very intimate conversations. Rob's research revealed that Erica Frost was Lance's actual girlfriend, a 24-year-old cocktail waitress who believed Lance was using rich clients to fund their future together. The web of deception was even more complex than Rob had imagined. Frank, I want you to arrange for Erica to discover exactly where Lance is and who he's with. Make it look accidental. How accidental? Social media posts from the resort's official accounts. Someone as photogenic as Lance and Rachel will definitely end up in the background of promotional photos. That evening, Rob received the call he'd been expecting. Nicole's phone rang at exactly 7 p.m., Rachel calling for their nightly check-in. Hi, Mom. How's Dallas? Nicole's performance was flawless. Wonderful, sweetheart. The conference has been very enlightening. Rachel's voice carried the relaxed tone of someone who believed they'd successfully deceived their family. Are you learning lots about real estate? More than I ever expected. Rachel laughed, probably looking at Lance across their resort suite. I'll tell you all about it when I get home. I can't wait, Nicole said, and Rob heard the knife edge in his daughter's voice that Rachel completely missed. After the call ended, Rob made his final preparations for Thursday, the day Rachel and Lance would discover that their vacation was about to become a nightmare. Chapter 5. The Trap Springs. Thursday morning in Cabo, San Lucas dawned perfect and cloudless. Rachel woke in Lance's arms, feeling more alive than she had in years. The premium suite overlooked the crystal blue waters of the Sea of Cortez, and for the first time in months, she felt free from the suffocating weight of her marriage to Rob. She didn't know that 1,500 miles away, her husband was systematically destroying her life. The first blow landed at 8:30 a.m. when Lance's phone exploded with notifications. His girlfriend Erica had discovered his vacation through a resort's Instagram post that showed him and Rachel sharing a passionate kiss at the infinity pool. What the hell is this? Lance stared at his phone as angry texts poured in from Erica. The final message was a photo of his apartment building with the caption, "Your stuff is on the sidewalk. Don't come back." Rachel, fresh from the shower and wrapped in a luxury bathrobe, noticed Lance's distress. "What's wrong, baby?" It's nothing. Just a drama back home." Lance forced a smile, but Rachel could see the panic in his eyes. At 9 a.m., Lance received another call, this one from his business partner and gym landlord. "Lance, where the hell are you? The city shut us down yesterday. Full closure, red tagged. They're saying we need 20 grand in repairs before we can reopen." Lance's face went white. "That's impossible. We just had an inspection 6 months ago." "Well, we failed this one spectacularly. Electrical, fire safety, ADA compliance, everything. I've got 4 months of your back rent sitting on my desk, and now no income from the gym. You better get back here and figure this out, or I'm finding a new tenant." Rachel watched Lance pace the balcony, his paradise vacation rapidly turning into a crisis management session. She felt a flicker of unease, but dismissed it. These things happen in business. At 10:15 a.m., the third bomb dropped. Lance's phone rang with calls from 4 different numbers, the husbands of his other clients. Each conversation was brief and carried the same theme: stay away from my wife, or else. By 11 a.m., Lance Barrett realized his entire business model had been exposed and destroyed in a single morning. But he still didn't understand that he was facing Rob Gonzalez. Back in Austin, Rob was orchestrating the second phase of his assault. He called Gustavo Bowers, a journalist who specialized in exposing Austin's social elite. Gustavo, I have a story for you about a fitness trainer who's been seducing wealthy married women for financial gain, complete with photos, financial records, and testimony from multiple victims. How complete are we talking? Complete enough to destroy him socially and professionally. The story writes itself. Predatory trainer targets vulnerable wives, steals from families, operates unlicensed business. I'm sending you everything right now. When do you want this published? Tomorrow morning. Front page of the lifestyle section. Rob's next call was to Denise Pugh, a social media influencer with 500,000 followers who specialized in exposing cheaters and scammers. Denise, I have content that will break the internet. Within hours, the machine was in motion. Gustavo's article was being fact-checked and prepared for publication. Denise was creating a viral video expose. Bernie was anonymously tipping off lifestyle bloggers, gossip websites, and local TV stations. But Rob's masterpiece was still to come. That evening, while Rachel and Lance were having dinner at the resort's most expensive restaurant, Frank Waters received his final instructions. Frank, it's time for the coup de grace. I want you to arrange for hotel security to confiscate Lance's credit cards. On what grounds? Suspected fraud. A concerned citizen noticed suspicious spending patterns and reported potential identity theft. Rob's voice was calm. Make sure it happens publicly, in front of other guests. And then Rachel Gonzalez discovers exactly how much Lance Barrett was willing to steal from her family for this vacation. At 9:30 p.m. Cabo time, Lance Barrett's world completely collapsed. Hotel security approached their table just as he was ordering another bottle of champagne with Rachel's credit card. Mr. Barrett, we need to speak with you privately about your payment methods. The conversation that followed was conducted in full view of the restaurant's other patrons. Lance's credit cards were confiscated pending fraud investigation. His wallet was searched. His explanations became increasingly desperate and inconsistent. Rachel sat frozen as she realized that Lance had no money of his own, that their entire vacation was being financed by her accounts, and that the man she'd fallen in love with was essentially a sophisticated con artist. But the final revelation came when hotel security showed them the fraud report that had triggered the investigation, a detailed complaint filed by a concerned family member who noticed unusual spending patterns on Rachel Gonzalez's accounts. Rachel's blood turned to ice as she read the report. The language was precise, legal, and unmistakably familiar. The complaint included detailed financial records, copies of text messages, and a complete timeline of Lance's relationship with multiple married women. Rob, she whispered. That night, Rachel tried calling her husband 17 times. Every call went straight to voicemail. She tried Nicole, but her daughter's phone was turned off. Lance, meanwhile, was discovering that his problems extended far beyond a vacation gone wrong. His business was destroyed, his apartment lease terminated, his girlfriend gone, and his reputation about to be annihilated in the morning news cycle. As Rachel and Lance sat in their premium suite, which they could no longer afford and couldn't leave because their return flight wasn't until Saturday, they finally understood the scope of what they were facing. Rob Gonzalez hadn't just discovered their affair. He had systematically engineered their complete destruction while they were celebrating their betrayal of his family. The hunt was over. Now came the reckoning. Chapter 6. The Reckoning Unfolds. Friday morning brought a media firestorm that exceeded even Rob's expectations. Gustavo Bowers' article in the Austin Chronicle hit the newsstands with the headline, Fitness Trainer's Web of Deceit, How Lance Barrett Seduced Austin's Elite Wives. The story detailed his systematic targeting of wealthy married women, complete with photos from the Cabo vacation showing him with Rachel. But it was Denise Pugh's social media expose that turned Lance Barrett into Austin's most hated man. Her video, titled Predatory Trainer Steals from Families for Luxury Vacations, went viral within hours. By noon, it had been shared over 50,000 times and picked up by 3 local TV stations. The video included surveillance footage from Barrett's fitness showing Lance with various married clients in compromising positions, financial records proving his debt situation, and audio recordings of him bragging about his stupid rich housewives to other trainers. In Cabo, Rachel and Lance were trapped in a nightmare. The hotel management, now aware of their situation through the fraud investigation, had frozen their suite access pending payment resolution. Lance's humiliation was complete when resort security escorted him through the lobby in front of other guests. Rachel called Rob's office from the hotel business center, her hands shaking as Theodore Farrell answered instead of her husband. "Theo, where's Rob? I need to talk to him." "Mrs. Gonzalez, I'm Mr. Gonzalez's attorney. Your husband is currently unavailable, but I've been instructed to inform you that divorce proceedings have been initiated. You'll receive formal papers upon your return to Austin." "Divorce?" "Theo, this is all a misunderstanding. I can explain." "Mrs. Gonzalez, the evidence of your extramarital affair is comprehensive and documented. Additionally, you've been charged with theft from a minor, specifically taking your daughter's savings without permission for personal use." Rachel's world tilted. "Theft from a minor? That's ridiculous. Nicole is my daughter. Nicole is 17 years old, and the money was her personal savings taken by you for an extramarital vacation. In Texas, that constitutes theft from a minor, punishable by up to 2 years in prison." The line went dead. Lance, meanwhile, was discovering that his legal troubles extended beyond financial fraud. Bernie Hester had arranged for 3 of his former clients to file sexual harassment lawsuits, claiming they were coerced into intimate relationships through financial pressure and emotional manipulation. By Friday evening, Lance Barrett was facing potential criminal charges, civil lawsuits, and complete social ostracism. His gym was permanently closed, his business license revoked, and his reputation destroyed beyond repair. But Rob's plan was far from complete. That night, as Rachel and Lance sat in the airport hotel trying to figure out how to pay for their early return flight, Nicole made her first public statement about her mother's betrayal. She posted a single photo on her social media accounts, the Patek Philippe watch on her father's wrist, with the caption, "When I saved for 6 months to buy my dad a Father's Day gift, my mother stole the money for her vacation with her boyfriend. This is what real character looks like. Dad bought the watch anyway and taught me that family loyalty means everything. Some people are worth the sacrifice. Others aren't." The post was shared within their social circle and beyond, garnering thousands of supportive comments. Austin's elite social network, which had always admired Rob's success and respected his family, rallied around Nicole and condemned Rachel's actions. The social isolation was immediate and complete. Rachel's real estate career, built on relationships with Austin's wealthy families, evaporated overnight. Her clients canceled listings, her colleagues distanced themselves, and her broker called to terminate her association with the firm. Saturday morning, Rachel and Lance's return flight was a study in humiliation. They sat in the last row of economy class, the only seats they could afford, while other passengers whispered and pointed after recognizing them from the viral video. Lance was arrested at Austin Bergstrom International Airport on charges of operating an unlicensed business and fraud related to his gym's health department violations. The timing wasn't coincidental. Rob had arranged for the arrest to occur in the most public possible venue. Rachel took a taxi to what had been her home for 20 years. When she arrived, she found the locks changed and her belongings neatly packed in boxes on the front porch. A legal notice taped to the door informed her that the house was no longer her residence and that trespassing would result in immediate arrest. She called Nicole's phone and was shocked when her daughter actually answered. "Nicole, baby, please. Let me explain." "Explain what, Mom?" "How you stole my money. How you lied to us for months. How you chose your trainer over your family." Nicole's voice was cold, controlled, a perfect mirror of her father's tone when he was truly angry. "It's not that simple. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. Dad, show me everything. Every text message, every lie, every betrayal. You didn't just cheat on him, Mom. You cheated on me too." "Nicole, I'm still your mother." "No, you're not. You stopped being my mother the moment you decided Lance Barrett was more important than your family. Dad never gives up on the people he loves, but he also never forgives the people who betray him. You made your choice. The line went dead. Rachel sat in her car outside the house where she'd raised her daughter, watching through the windows as Rob and Nicole had dinner together. They looked happy, peaceful even, as if her absence had lifted a weight from their shoulders. She tried calling Rob one final time. This time he answered. Rachel, Rob, please. We need to talk. I can fix this. There's nothing to fix. You show me who you really are, and I responded accordingly. His voice carried no anger, no emotion at all, just the cold finality that had terrified his business competitors for years. The house, the money, the social destruction. This is insane. I made a mistake, but you didn't make a mistake, Rachel. You made a choice. You chose to steal from our daughter, betray our marriage, and humiliate our family. Now you get to live with the consequences. Rob, please. I have nowhere to go, no job, no. You have Lance. Isn't that what you wanted? Lance is in jail. Then perhaps you should have chosen more carefully. Rob's voice carried a hint of dark amusement. Goodbye, Rachel. Don't contact Nicole or me again. As Rachel sat in her car, homeless and friendless in the city where she'd once been part of the elite social circle, she finally understood the man she'd married and betrayed. Rob Gonzalez didn't just win. He annihilated his enemies so completely that they never recovered. And she had just learned that in his mind, she was no longer his wife. She was his enemy. Chapter 7. The Final Moves. 2 weeks after Rachel's return from Cabo, the destruction of her life was so complete that even Rob's business associates began to whisper that perhaps he'd gone too far. But Rob Gonzalez had never been a man who did anything halfway, and betrayal, especially from family, demanded absolute consequences. Lance Barrett's life had become a cautionary tale. The sexual harassment lawsuits had frozen his assets, the criminal charges prevented him from finding employment, and a social media campaign had made him recognizable enough that he couldn't work anywhere in Austin. He'd moved into a studio apartment in the worst part of town, surviving on welfare and the occasional charity of former gym members who didn't know the full story. Rachel's situation was marginally better, but only because she'd managed to find work as a part-time receptionist at a low-end motel on the outskirts of town. Her real estate license had been suspended pending investigation into her business practices, and her former lifestyle had become a memory. But Rob wasn't finished. On a Thursday evening, he called Nicole into his office for what would be their final conversation about her mother. Nicole, I want you to understand something important, Rob said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Your mother is going to try to contact you again. When she does, she'll appeal to your emotions, your sense of family, your natural compassion. Nicole, now 18 and preparing for college, had inherited her father's steel backbone. She could try. I won't listen. Good, but I need you to understand why this is so important. Rob opened a folder on his desk. Your mother didn't just betray me, Nicole. She showed you that family loyalty means nothing to her. If she could steal from you once, she would do it again. I know, Dad. I'm not changing my mind. Rob smiled, the genuine expression he reserved only for his daughter. I'm proud of you, but there's something else. Your mother's situation is about to become much worse. Worse how? Lance Barrett is about to discover that his legal troubles are just beginning. And when he realizes how thoroughly I've destroyed his life, he's going to look for someone to blame. Rob's prediction proved accurate. On Friday night, Lance Barrett showed up at Rachel's motel room, drunk and desperate. The conversation that followed was captured by security cameras that Rob had arranged to be installed in the motel's common areas. Lance blamed Rachel for everything. The media exposure, the lawsuits, the criminal charges, his complete social ostracism. In his alcohol-fueled rage, he accused her of being a rich bitch who destroyed my life for fun. Rachel's response revealed the full depth of her self-delusion. I gave up everything for you. My husband, my daughter, my home, everything. You gave up nothing. Lance screamed. You were bored with your rich husband and wanted to play with a pretty trainer. Well, congratulations. You played yourself right into poverty. The argument escalated into a physical confrontation that ended with Lance being arrested for domestic violence and Rachel being hospitalized with minor injuries. The incident made the local news, adding another layer of humiliation to her already destroyed reputation. But it also served Rob's final purpose. The next morning, Rob visited Rachel in the hospital. She looked up from her bed, one eye blackened and her arm in a sling, and saw her former husband standing in the doorway like an avenging angel. Rob, her voice was barely a whisper. Rachel. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. I thought you should know that Nicole and I watched the security footage from last night. Rachel's remaining hope died in her eyes. Nicole saw that. She saw you defending the man who humiliated our family, choosing him over the daughter you abandoned. Rob's voice was calm, conversational. She also saw him hit you. Rob, please. Nicole wanted to press charges against Lance for assault. I told her it wasn't necessary. Rob smiled, and Rachel finally understood the difference between his business smile and the expression of a predator. Lance Barrett will face consequences for touching a member of my family, regardless of your current relationship status. What are you going to do to him? Nothing illegal, nothing traceable. But Lance Barrett will discover that there are fates worse than prison. Rob's eyes held the same cold calculation that had built his empire. He'll spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, wondering when his past will catch up to him. Rachel stared at her former husband, finally seeing him clearly for the first time in 20 years. You're not the man I married. Yes, I am. You just never bothered to pay attention. Rob turned toward the door, then paused. Rachel, Nicole asked me to give you a message. What? She said to tell you that she hopes you're happy with your choice, because those are the only consequences you'll ever face from our family. We're done with you. Rob left the hospital and drove to his office, where he made 2 final phone calls. The first was to Manuel Moses, a man who specialized in making problems disappear permanently, not through violence, but through relocation services for people who needed to start over somewhere far away. Manuel, I have a job for you. Lance Barrett needs to understand that Austin is no longer a safe place for him to live. How permanent are we talking? Permanent enough that he never contacts my family again. The second call was to Garrett Williamson. Garrett, I want you to arrange a meeting with Rachel's motel manager. I'm going to buy that property. You want to evict her? I want to give her 6 months free rent and a paid bus ticket to whatever city she chooses. After that, she's on her own. Garrett was quiet for a moment. That's surprisingly generous. I'm not a monster, Garrett. I'm a father who protected his family from betrayal. Rachel made her choice, and she's faced the consequences. But I won't have Nicole wondering if I was unnecessarily cruel to her mother. And after the 6 months? After 6 months, Rachel Gonzalez will be someone else's problem in some other city. As long as she stays away from Austin and never contacts Nicole again, I have no interest in her existence. That evening, Rob and Nicole had dinner together in their home, just the 2 of them, as it had been for the past month. Nicole was leaving for college in the fall, but the bond between them had only grown stronger through the crisis. Dad, can I ask you something? Nicole said as they finished their meal. Anything. Do you ever regret how far you went with Mom and Lance? Rob considered the question carefully. Nicole, your mother didn't just betray me. She betrayed you, and she betrayed the concept of family itself. When someone shows you who they really are, you have to respond accordingly. But she's still my mother. Biologically, yes. But being a parent is about more than genetics. It's about loyalty, sacrifice, and putting your child's well-being before your own desires. Your mother failed that test. Rob's voice softened. You saved for 6 months to buy me a gift because you love our family. She stole that money to fund her affair. That tells you everything you need to know about character. Nicole nodded slowly. I understand, and I agree with what you did. I just wanted to make sure you don't carry any guilt about it. Rob smiled at his daughter, the only person in the world who truly knew him and loved him anyway. No guilt, sweetheart. Only certainty that I protected what matters most. 3 days later, Lance Barrett disappeared from Austin. Manuel Moses had convinced him that certain individuals were looking for him, and that his best chance of survival was to start over in a different state under a different name. Rachel took the bus ticket to Phoenix, carrying only a small suitcase and the knowledge that her former life was permanently over. And Rob Gonzalez sat in his office, the Patek Philippe watch glinting on his wrist, knowing that he had taught his daughter the most important lesson of all. Loyalty must be rewarded, and betrayal must be punished, regardless of family bonds. The price of betrayal had been paid in full. Chapter 8. The Inheritance. 6 months after Rachel's departure, Nicole Gonzalez was thriving at the University of Texas, majoring in business with a minor in psychology. She called her father every Sunday evening, their conversations ranging from academic achievements to investment strategies. Rob had begun teaching her the family business, recognizing that she possessed not only his intelligence, but his instinct for reading people's true intentions. On one particular Sunday in December, Nicole brought up a subject that had been weighing on her mind. "Dad, I've been thinking about what happened with Mom, and I realize I learned something important from watching you handle the situation." "What's that?" "That forgiveness and trust are two different things. You can forgive someone for hurting you, but that doesn't mean you have to trust them again or allow them back into your life." Rob felt a surge of pride. At 18, Nicole understood concepts that had taken him decades to learn. Exactly. Your mother's actions revealed her character. Once someone shows you they're willing to betray family for personal gain, they'll do it again if given the opportunity. "Have you heard anything about her?" "Nothing directly. Theodore tells me she's working at a restaurant in Phoenix, trying to rebuild her life." Lance Barrett, on the other hand, seems to have vanished completely. Rob didn't mention that Manuel Moses sent him quarterly reports confirming that Lance was working construction in Oregon under an assumed name, still looking over his shoulder and avoiding social media. Some lessons needed to be permanent. The conversation was interrupted by Rob's business phone. Theodore Farrell was calling with news that would test everything Rob had taught his daughter about loyalty and betrayal. "Rob, we have a problem. Rachel has hired a lawyer in Phoenix. She's claiming that the divorce proceedings were fraudulent and that she was coerced into signing papers under duress." "What's her legal standing?" "Weak, but not impossible. She's arguing that she was emotionally traumatized and not of sound mind when she agreed to the settlement. Her new lawyer is also claiming that some of the evidence against her was obtained illegally." Rob's expression hardened. "Theodore, be very clear with me. Is there any chance she could successfully challenge the divorce or claim any portion of my assets?" "Small chance, but it exists. Texas is a community property state, and if she can prove coercion or fraud in the proceedings, she might be entitled to a portion of the marital assets." After hanging up, Rob sat in his office considering his options. He could fight Rachel's legal challenge through conventional means, spending months in court and risking public exposure of his more aggressive tactics. Or he could end this permanently. He chose option 3. He would test Nicole's loyalty one final time. That evening, Rob called his daughter back. "Nicole, I need to tell you something, and then I need you to make a choice." "What's wrong?" "Your mother is trying to overturn our divorce. She's hired a lawyer and is claiming that I coerced her into signing the papers. If she succeeds, she could potentially claim half of everything I've built, including your inheritance." Nicole was quiet for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to give you the choice. I can fight this legally, which might take years and cost millions. I can make the problem disappear permanently, which would ensure your future is secure. Or I can negotiate with her, give her enough money to make the lawsuit go away. What do you think I should choose?" Rob smiled at his daughter's directness. "I think you should choose based on what you've learned about character and consequences. Your mother had everything: a loving family, financial security, social status. She threw it all away for a man who hit her in a motel room. Now she wants to come back and take half of what we've built together." "She already made her choice," Nicole said quietly. "She chose Lance over us. She chose her affair over her family. She chose to steal from me rather than respect my gift to you. And people who make those choices don't get to come back when their consequences become uncomfortable." Nicole's voice carried the same steel backbone that Rob had possessed at her age. "Handle it however you think is best, Dad. But don't let her take anything from our family again." Rob felt a complex mixture of pride and concern. His daughter had inherited his strength, but he wondered if she truly understood what she was asking him to do. "Nicole, when I say handle it, I need you to understand that there are different levels of permanence. Are you asking me to make this go away temporarily or permanently?" I'm asking you to protect our family the same way you always have, whatever that takes." The next morning, Rob made a single phone call to a number he hadn't used in over a decade. When the voice answered, Rob simply said, "I need to discuss a permanent solution to a recurring problem." How permanent? Permanent enough that the problem never resurfaces, but subtle enough that no one asks questions. "I understand. It'll take 2 weeks to arrange." Rob hung up and immediately called Theodore. "Theo, I want you to prepare a counteroffer for Rachel's lawyer. We'll give her $100,000 and a signed agreement that she never contacts Nicole or me again. If she accepts, the offer stands. If she refuses, she gets nothing. And if she refuses, then the problem resolves itself through other means." Rachel's lawyer called back within 3 hours. She would accept the settlement. But Rob had already set the permanent solution in motion, and some operations couldn't be recalled once initiated. He made one final call to cancel the arrangement, but learned that certain types of problems, once scheduled for resolution, developed their own momentum. 2 weeks later, Rachel Gonzalez died in a car accident in Phoenix. The police report indicated brake failure on a mountain road, a tragic but not uncommon occurrence in older vehicles. Nicole flew home for the funeral, which was attended by exactly 3 people: Nicole, Rob, and Theodore Farrell. No other family members appeared, no friends from Rachel's former life, no colleagues from her Phoenix restaurant job. As they stood at the graveside, Nicole asked her father a single question: "Did you know this would happen?" Rob looked at his daughter, intelligent, strong, and now carrying the weight of understanding what family loyalty sometimes required. "Nicole, there are some questions that are better left unasked, and some answers that are better left unsaid." "Exactly." Nicole nodded slowly. She was her father's daughter, and she understood that some prices were paid in full, even when the payment method remained unspoken. As they drove away from the cemetery, Rob reflected on the lessons he'd learned from his father and passed on to his daughter. Trust was a luxury only fools could afford. Betrayal must always be punished, and family loyalty, once broken, could never be repaired. The Gonzalez family was now complete at exactly 2 members, both of whom understood perfectly that some bonds were stronger than blood, and some betrayals were unforgivable. Chapter 9. Legacy. 5 years later, Nicole Gonzalez sat in her father's office, now their office, reviewing quarterly reports from their expanded business empire. At 23, she had inherited not only Rob's intelligence and business acumen, but his absolute intolerance for betrayal and his uncompromising approach to family loyalty. The watch Rob had bought with her gift money still sat prominently on his wrist, a daily reminder of the difference between family and blood relations. Nicole wore a matching piece, a Cartier watch Rob had given her for her college graduation, engraved with the words "Loyalty rewards loyalty." Their business had grown substantially since Rachel's death. Nicole's natural talent for reading people and her inherited ruthlessness had made her invaluable in negotiations and partnership decisions. Together, they had built an empire that extended far beyond construction and real estate. On this particular evening, they were reviewing a potential acquisition when Nicole's assistant buzzed in with an unexpected call. "Ms. Gonzalez, there's a gentleman on line 3 who says he's your cousin. His name is Frank Gonzalez." Rob and Nicole exchanged glances. Rob's family had been estranged for decades, ever since his father's business partners had tried to cheat the family out of their holdings. Rob had handled that situation with characteristic thoroughness, and the Gonzalez name had since commanded both respect and fear in certain circles. Nicole answered the call on speaker. "This is Nicole Gonzalez." "Nicole, this is Frank Gonzalez, your father's cousin. I know we've never met, but I'm calling because I have some information that might interest your family." Rob leaned forward. "Frank, this is Rob. What kind of information?" "Information about Rachel's death." The room went completely silent. After 5 years, Rachel's death had become simply another closed chapter in their family history. But Frank's tone suggested that chapter might not be as closed as they believed. "What about Rachel's death?" Rob's voice carried the dangerous calm that his business associates had learned to fear. "I think we should meet in person." There are things that need to be discussed face to face. They arranged to meet at a private club where Rob maintained membership, neutral territory where conversations could be held without electronic surveillance. Frank Gonzalez turned out to be a man in his 50s with the same dark eyes and calculating expression that ran in the family. Rob, Nicole, thank you for meeting me. What I'm about to tell you will probably come as a shock. Frank opened a briefcase and removed several documents. Rachel didn't die in an accident. She was murdered. Nicole's expression didn't change, but Rob felt a chill of recognition. How do you know this? Because I'm the one who killed her. Rob stared at his cousin, processing this revelation. Why? Because someone paid me to. Someone who wanted Rachel dead, but couldn't afford to be connected to her death. Frank's smile was cold and familiar. Someone who hired me through a series of intermediaries so that the contract could never be traced back to them. Nicole spoke for the first time. And you're telling us this because the person who hired me died last month. Natural causes, heart attack. And before he died, he confessed to his lawyer about ordering Rachel's death. The lawyer is now trying to decide what to do with that information. Rob felt the familiar sensation of pieces clicking into place. What do you want, Frank? I want to know if you knew your wife was going to be killed when you set certain events in motion 5 years ago. The question hung in the air like smoke. Rob looked at his daughter, seeing his own understanding reflected in her eyes. Nicole had inherited his intelligence, and she could see the same connections he was seeing. Frank, Rob said carefully, I think you should tell us exactly what you know. I know that Rachel's accident was arranged by a man named Gregory Chun, a business associate of yours who lost a major contract when your divorce became public. Chun blamed Rachel for damaging your reputation and costing him money. Rob remembered Chun, a property developer who had severed their partnership after the media circus surrounding Rachel's affair. The man had been bitter about losing access to Rob's resources and connections. Chun hired me to kill Rachel through 3 intermediaries, so the contract could never be traced back to him. But here's the interesting part. Chun told his lawyer that he was convinced you wanted Rachel dead, but couldn't arrange it yourself due to the legal scrutiny. Nicole leaned forward. Are you suggesting my father somehow manipulated this Chun person into ordering the hit? Frank's smile widened. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just reporting what Chun believed before he died. He was convinced that Rob had somehow maneuvered him into taking action that Rob couldn't take himself. Rob felt a familiar satisfaction, the same feeling he'd experienced when business competitors destroyed themselves trying to outmaneuver him. And what does Chin's lawyer intend to do with this information? That depends on what he believes happened. If he thinks you orchestrated Rachel's death, he'll go to the police. If he thinks Chun acted independently out of misplaced loyalty, then the matter stays buried with Chun, Nicole finished. Exactly. Rob considered his options. The situation was complex, but not unmanageable. Frank, what's your assessment of this lawyer's character? Pragmatic, concerned primarily with protecting his own interests. He doesn't want to be involved in a murder investigation unless he has to be. Then I suggest you tell him the truth. That Gregory Chun was a bitter man who blamed an innocent woman for his business failures and took action that no one could have predicted or prevented. Frank nodded slowly. That's certainly one way to interpret the situation. It's the only way to interpret the situation, Nicole said, her voice carrying the same authority as her father's. Because anything else would be speculation about matters that can't be proven. After Frank left, Rob and Nicole sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Nicole spoke. Dad, did you know Gregory Chun would react that way when the divorce became public? Rob looked at his daughter, brilliant, strong, and now carrying the weight of understanding what family protection sometimes required. Nicole, there are some questions that are better left unasked, she finished. I understand, but I need to know if I'm going to inherit more than just your business empire. Rob studied his daughter's face, seeing the same calculation that had made him successful and feared. Nicole, what did you learn from watching how I handled your mother's betrayal? That loyalty must be rewarded and betrayal must be punished. That family comes first, always. That some people will destroy themselves if you give them enough rope. And and that sometimes the most effective action is the action you never have to take directly. Nicole's smile was razor-sharp. Gregory Chun destroyed himself trying to curry favor with you. Rachel died because of her own choices, not because of anything you did to her. Rob felt the complex mixture of pride and concern that had become familiar over the past 5 years. And if the lawyer decides to pursue this further, then Gregory Chin's estate will face a wrongful death lawsuit that destroys his family's finances. His lawyer will face disbarment proceedings for failing to maintain client confidentiality. And Frank will discover that the Gonzalez family protects its own. Rob looked at the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, a symbol of family loyalty purchased with money that his wife had tried to steal from their daughter. Nicole wore her matching Cartier, a symbol of the bond they'd forged through betrayal and consequence. Nicole, you've learned the most important lesson about family and business. Sometimes the most powerful action is the one you never have to take directly, because other people will take that action for you if you understand their motivations well enough. Exactly. 3 weeks later, Gregory Chin's lawyer concluded that his client had acted independently out of misplaced loyalty and business frustration. The matter was closed without investigation. Frank Gonzalez disappeared back into whatever shadows he inhabited, and the Gonzalez family continued building their empire on the foundation that Rob's father had taught him decades earlier. Trust no one completely, but understand everyone's price. Rob and Nicole never discussed Rachel's death again. But every Father's Day, Nicole gave her father a small gift. Never expensive, always meaningful. And they both remembered the lesson that had forged their unbreakable bond. Family loyalty was everything. Betrayal was unforgivable, and some prices were paid in full, even when the payment method remained forever unspoken. The Gonzalez legacy was complete, a father and daughter who understood that in a world full of betrayal, only family could be trusted, and only if that family proved itself worthy of trust every single day. Rob Gonzalez had built an empire, protected his daughter, and